tried to figure out where they are, when they were taken, who's in the pictures. Probably about 2,000 of those. There's still a couple of big gray archival boxes downstairs full of pictures that I haven't even started on yet. So there's more to come. There have been many, many professional types of meeting guide. Okay. Lots of professional pictures. Fred was a professional photographer, but much of what I've been looking through and going through has been his own personal photo albums, the albums that he and his wife kept and that they scribbled notes in, and they took snapshots of themselves and their family. What's the best way to advance?
Is yours
Screen sharing. Down here. You do it there.
Oh,
Yes.
so I don't know which one of us was doing that.
So the here.
Yep.
Okay. By far the most difficult part of getting ready to do this presentation is deciding which pictures to show you, because there's just so many and there's such a treasure trove. What I've ended up with, I think, says something about Fred's place in town, his affection for Marblehead, and for the people who lived here. All the photos that you're going to see were taken between 1890 and 1920. And during those years, Fred was from 20 years old to about 50 years old. So this is kind of a 30-year period of photos that we're going to be looking at. This is just a montage of the albums and the photo books and that I deal with on a regular basis. Okay, so we'll start with looking at just a few of the iconic places and views. These are probably pictures you've seen before. They're beautifully composed and framed. Obviously, a lot of effort and thought went into them. And they show us often places that in many cases have changed very little and are easy to recognize today, such as the Corinthian Yacht Club, which still looks pretty much the same. I think these buildings over on the side here have changed somewhat. Here's a great view of the old townhouse. It's possible to get rid of the text at the bottom. No. Or something. It's all right. Okay. At first glance, this looks very deserted. But if you look closely, there are a few people pausing. There's some people on the sidewalk over here who are looking at the photographer. There's a group of people who are pausing in what they're doing at the entrance to the townhouse. And I did a zoom in on that so you can see. There's some people with a bike pausing, looking at the photographer. There's some children here at the pump that was next to the townhouse, and there's some dogs going wild at the bottom there. You can see the sign on the building says Market Square. Abbott Hall. Except for the dirt road, this looks like it could have been taken yesterday. It's exactly the same, even right down to the fence. I think the fence is the same or pretty similar to what you see there. The Lee Mansion, a classic shot of the Lee Mansion when it was being used by two different banks, and you can see the bank signs on the front, one on the left, one on the right. The Marblehead National Bank and the Marblehead Savings Bank. This is Castle Rock with a relatively empty shoreline on the right there. And of course, that's packed with houses now. And there's lots of picnickers and people out on top of a rock. It was the popular destination for a day trip out of town. Of course, Fred took many photos of the harbor, beautiful pictures of the harbor. And this one has a sailboat in motion. Why it's a little blurred is because it was a longer exposure and the boat was sailing past as he took the picture. And another from Crocker Park area. Of course, there were no motorboats. Maybe the ferry was there. So it must have been pretty quiet and beautiful at that time. And then this is a nice view of the harbor, taken most likely from Abbott Hall. And you can see down here, these houses are on Gregory Street. And this Fraser Yacht Yard is right where Lee Street comes in and meets Gregory. You can see Lee Street curving around right here on the side. Okay, so this is Fred's family around 1900. His mother, his father, Fred is in the middle, and he had two brothers, Harold and John, and a sister, Bessie. This is Fred as a young man. He was born in Marblehead in 1869. In this picture, which is dated 1887, he's about 18 years old. He got his first camera that year. In a write-up that I found in the Messenger, he said, I got my first camera in 1887 when I was just 2 years out of high school. So I guess he graduated from Marblehead High School at 16. He also went to the story school. And as an adult was organizing a story school reunion and taking pictures of his classmates. This is his mother, Mary Abby Shirley. She was a native Marbleheader. In this picture, she's about 20. And this is probably about a year before Fred was born. And this is Fred's father, Charles Litchman. He was known as Charlie. He was extremely accomplished and involved in both local and national politics and labor unions. You could really do a 3-hour presentation about Charlie. I could spend a lot of time on his resume, but briefly, he was at various times an auctioneer, a shoemaker, a clerk, a publisher, a labor union administrator, a member of the Marblehead School Committee, a member of the Massachusetts Legislature, a member of the United States Industrial Commission, secretary of the Railroad Commission, an editor, an enumerator for the census, a publisher, an immigration inspector. You get the idea. He must have been a really tough act to follow for his children. So just returning to that picture once again, around 1900. One interesting thing about Charlie is that from 1894 to 1902, when he died, he lived in Newark, New Jersey, and was affiliated with the Republic Savings and Loan Association. I'm not sure in what capacity. His family stayed in Marblehead, but he lived in New Jersey. In this picture, which was taken around 1900, he must have come home for the photograph. And I've named the individual family members here. John's tag in the front here is under the computer stuff. And then I did some close-ups for you as well. Fred's parents, Mary and Charlie, are both about 50 here. Fred's about 30. Harold is 22, John 21, and Bessie, the youngest, was about 20. And they all married Marbleheaders, and they all had kids, except for Fred. For all intents and purposes, Fred was Charles and Mary's oldest child. They actually had 8 children altogether, but only those 4 lived beyond infancy and childhood. So there was Fred, Harold, John, and Bessie. This is a photo that Fred used professionally. And he transitioned from that younger look to this look seemingly overnight. I found nothing in between. And once he adopted this look, the hair, the glasses, the mustache, he looked exactly the same for the next 50 years. It's hard to tell, to age him by looking at a picture because he looks like this in just about all his photographs. This is a more casual pose of the Litchman children enjoying a meal together, Bessie, John, Harold, and Fred. I can imagine Fred setting up this photo with his siblings and saying, act natural. And he looks somewhat relaxed, but the rest of them all look very awkward and self-conscious about having their picture taken. That was very characteristic for Fred. He would frequently jump into a picture. He would set it up, he'd maybe take a few shots himself, but then he would turn the camera over to an assistant or a friend who could just press the shutter, and Fred would get into the pictures himself. So we're very lucky to have many, many photos of Litchman himself. This is Cora Lee Mason. She was born in 1875, so she was 6 years younger than Fred. She was also born in Marblehead. This picture is about 1895, and Fred and Cora got married in 1902 when she was 27 and he was 33. So he was a photographer. That's how we know him and remember him today. He was actually hardworking and active in the community, but we certainly know him best today as a photographer. He started a job printing business in 1887 when he was that 18-year-old, just briefly out of high school, and he added photography to that when he opened his studio on State Street in 1898. And this is what that location looked like at the time. The building in the center with the Fred Litchman photographer sign is number 15 State Street, and we know that today as Maddie's. That's Maddie's. At that time, the Marblehead Laundry was on the first floor, and Fred's office and studio were on the second floor. Fred is actually posing here at the corner of the building, and I did a little zoom in there so you could see him. At first, I was very perplexed by what team laundry meant. And then I realized the sign actually says steam laundry. There's also a woman inside the laundry looking out, very curious as to what's going on. And Fred there was a walkway, a wooden walkway down the side of the building to get to the back door, which was how you went into Fred's office. So he's standing right at the entrance to that walkway, and there's this bulletin board with pictures that he's taken, that he's posted there with examples of his photography. Another interesting thing about this picture is that there's a person looking out the second floor window here. And that is a common theme you're going to see, that whenever there were pictures being taken, somebody was hanging out the windows of his studio. The building immediately next door here, of course, is gone now. There's a driveway there that leads from, and I always, still dating myself, still want to say Kenny's, Crosby's parking lot. For a long time, there was, at this time, pretty early on, there was a painting store, or painting and glazing, paper hanging, run by Mr. Wormstead. And over the years, it was a bakery, and then it became the State Street Garage. And apparently there was a garage there until the mid-50s. Miller Ford used the space at one point when they were having work done on their location further down Pleasant Street. But then it torn down, and there's an open space there now. And Maddie's has obviously changed the look of it. There's also a horse stable back there. Here's another shot of the same location, hanging out a shingle or a second sign below the first sign on State Street. Again, please note the people hanging out the window on the second floor, a common theme. And here's another view of the shot behind a pretty impressive looking automobile. There's a couple of things to notice in the photo. In addition to the boy sticking his head out the window, on the second floor. You can see him up there. He's really just about falling out the window. In this close-up, you can see the Marblehead laundry sign, George Peach ran that. That was on the first floor. There's a sign in the window. If you zoom in on it, you can see that it's for an event that was going on at Crocker Park. And there's Kodak sign on the opposite window. Now, I think Fred may have at one time used the first floor, or maybe he was just able to post some of his signage in the window of the first floor. I'm not sure. This is some advertising, part of an advertising flyer for his business. And it says at the bottom, entrance at right of building, 15 State Street, Marblehead, upstairs. So you would go down the side. I haven't been able to find a clean version of this yet, but you can see way back here, there's a sign at the back that says Fred B. Litchman. And that was, you would walk down this wooden boardwalk along the side of the building and go in from there. By 1907, Fred was giving talks with his photography, giving presentations of his photos. They were very popular and well attended. This one is for a presentation at Abbott Hall. There would be reports in the Messenger about what a successful presentation Mr. Litchman had given. There are also many, many photos of Fred at work. He liked to make sure that that was well documented, that he was at his desk and hard at work. And I think one thing I like about this picture is you notice in the back room behind him is his bicycle. The spring flyer that you all received has that great photo of the bicycle trip that the Litchman group took. And they obviously were big bicyclists because that's probably how he commuted to work. This seems to be the same office, just a different angle. This photo is 1898, so it would have been on State Street. And he seems to be showing this group of people an album, which is open on the desk in front of him. This is the interior of one of his studios, probably also State Street. The camera on a tripod, a couple of his seascapes down here, which he was very proud of, framed, and his banjo, which was important to have in a photo studio. He was all very musical and played a couple of instruments at least. He was for a time the official photographer for the Boston and Maine Railroad. And I don't know if that's what he's doing in this picture, but he's posing for another photographer while a third photographer is under the canvas setting up a shot. That's not my phone. The waterfront and the surf were, of course, two major subjects of his early photography, and he recognized that photographs of him taking photographs would be interesting documentation. So whenever you look at a picture like this, you have to remember that somehow he arranged to have someone else taking a photo of him taking the photo. Here he is in the middle with two assistants. This was captioned the day after Marblehead's big blizzard, February 1898. Harry True, FBL, which was how he usually refers to himself, and Edgar Parker. And Edgar has the box camera over his shoulder there. And this is that same trip. This one is captioned at the neck, just before starting for home. And another, here he is with another assistant. He refers to this person as Green, just Green, G-R-E-E-N-E, in several pictures. They're on bikes, but as you can see, Fred has a camera balanced on his bicycle here, so who knows where they're off to. And in this picture, he would apparently row to a seaside location. In this case, wrap the line from the boat around his leg so he wouldn't lose it, but he would bring an assistant to photograph him doing that. So he wasn't alone out there. He wasn't beyond putting himself in precarious positions to get the shot he wanted, and again, to make sure that someone documented him doing so. So in 1914, Fred moved his office and his home to 157 Washington Street. He and Cora lived on the second floor, and from 1914 until 2020, it was first Litchman's and then it was Litchman Warren Printing inside this location. His signage always said established 1898, and that was his first office down on State Street. Here's the inside. I think this is the interior of 157. Maybe that beadboard on the back, who knows? But the man behind him with the shovel on his shoulder is Ernest Mason, who was Cora's brother, his wife's brother. Not sure what he was off to do. And here's an older Fred, still on the waterfront, still taking photographs. In addition to his printing and photography work, he was active also in town politics. He was in many social and fraternal organizations, which were very popular at that time. YMCA, he was in the Mugford Association, he was active in the Universalist Church. He was a member of the Board of Auditors, and he was a Marblehead town assessor for 40 years, starting in 1901. He was chairman of the assessors for 17 years, and he retired in 1942. So Fred was one of the first street photographers, I think. He took many photos of all kinds of people around town. Just seemingly he would encounter them on the street and he would ask them to pose to have their picture taken. One of his, one subject he never seemed to tire of was Cora. This is Cora in the front center with her friends. Here they're in a serious and posed portrait. This one is captioned Jenny K, Linda C, Anna D, Alice N, Cora P, 1898. But also he'd take candids of Cora and her friends. This is Cora again in the middle here, and her friends. People, wagons, general activity was always of interest to him. I'm not sure where this is, if anyone recognizes this house, but it was sort of a typical scene. He also would photograph visitors to his studio. Here in 1888 or 89, in the center, that's his sister Bessie. And with two, I guess, friends or relations, Sadie Litchman and Maud Simons. Bessie would have been 7 or 8 years old in that picture. And here is Bessie as a young woman, sitting on her father Charles's lap, having her picture taken a few years later. This would have been taken prior to 1902 because Charlie died in 1902. He was in Washington, D.C. at President McKinley's request to give a speech at the Masonic Hall there, and he fell ill and died. And Fred, at age 33, had to go to Washington to accompany the body back to Marblehead. That was a big year for Fred. It was also the year he and Cora got married. Here's another visitor to his studio. This girl is identified in the captions as Mamie, the hurdy-gurdy girl. And hurdy-gurdies, here's a couple outside. I don't know if Mamie was any relation to this couple, but the hurdy-gurdies were very popular, sort of everyday entertainment in the late 1800s. Clubs and social groups would hire a hurdy-gurdy to provide music at their events. By 1998, if you go to the Messenger and search hurdy-gurdy, you'll find plenty of complaints about how terrible it sounded and what a nuisance it was. I guess it was something of a mix between an accordion and a bagpipe, if you can imagine. The complaints were so intense that in November of 1990, there was a hurdy-gurdy ordinance put into effect in Marblehead. You had to have a license, which cost $25, which seems outrageously high. You couldn't perform after 9 p.m. and any violations were to be fined $20. It seemed the nuisance continued for many years after that, however. This photo is, this character is ID'd as G.A.R. Vet Wormstead. I don't know if he's any relation to the paint and oil store down on State Street, but in 1929, I don't have a date on this picture, but in 1929, the Messenger talks about 92-year-old Civil War vet Joseph Wormstead, a Grand Army man and the oldest man in town at that time. This is a man and boy with a wagon on Mechanic Street. There's a dog in the carriage as well. I'm not sure who these guys are, waiters maybe, or butchers, potters. I don't know. And I don't know where they are, although I've seen other pictures in this environment. So that's something to do for some research. 3 girls, Carrie Haynes, Gertrude Giles, and Anna Gale, about 1890. And these 2 men at Bank Square, you see the Lee Mansion in the background with the bank signs still in place. They're identified as Sam Smith and old Ike Mason, who was Cora's father, the man with the beard. This is another character. It was captioned circa 1898, John Doherty. And I tend to see a name and then I go down the rabbit hole of looking at the old issues of the Messenger, trying to figure out more about this person. As near as I can tell, he had a sad life. In 1882, the Messenger reported that he was building a barn on his land on Front Street. And in 1888, he made some noticeable improvements to the fences. It was Facebook of the time. The Messenger would report that kind of thing. He was named to the board of directors of the Young Men's Catholic Temperance Society. In 1895, a building that he was using as a provision store burned to the ground.
Oh.
In 1902, he raised a 10-foot tall sunflower. In 1906, it refers to him as an inmate of the almshouse, which was the poorhouse or the work farm at the time. And that same year, he tried to commit suicide by cutting his throat at about age 76. By 1907, he had returned to his old quarters on State Street. By 1908, he was employed as a driver for the Lindsay Baking team, and he crashed into a store and was severely bruised. In 1909, he died, and his obituary in the Messenger said he had emigrated from Ireland at age 30, lived in Marblehead for 50 years, was a general laborer, a familiar figure on the streets, never married, and had no relations. That's why I'm so slow, Lauren, because I spend so much time looking at who these people were and what they've been doing. You do get the impression that people were happy to pause what they were doing and have their picture taken. There seems to have been a real rapport between Fred and the people that he would ask to pause and pose for his camera. This is your friendly neighborhood undertaker. I'm assuming this is Mr. Boomer. This was on, I did get an address and I don't have it here now, maybe Washington Street. I'm assuming this is Mr. Boomer, but it's a bit concerning that he's out on the street posing for a photograph in his work smock.
Yeah.
3 businessmen. This is, of course, 158 Washington Street, right down the street with the Hooper Mansion in the background. This is where Liberty, Henry, and Me is right now. It's an antique store at the time. Cora on the left. The hats are notable. The horse and carriage going by in the background, the boat stored behind them. These give you a real sense of what the streets were like. And finally, these two men with their baskets. Notice the fish that he's holding in his hands. Then I have some waterfront pictures. That's a subcategory in and of itself. Fred had a sailboat himself as a young man, and he sailed competitively. You can find how he did in the messenger reports. This was the Edith, 1899. This was captioned, that's Fred on the right, sitting on the piazza at the Burgess Yacht Club. This is Ernest Mason, again, Cora's brother. So here, Fred here. This man was identified as Dr. Goodwin, who apparently was a dentist. They're just getting some sun. This was Weiner's Boatyard. I think this was about where the Boston Yacht Club is now. It's down from Gregory Street. Many of his waterside photographs are really quite poetic and pretty. He loved the surf, took many wonderful photos of the surf, usually off the neck. He would go to the churn, what was called the churn at the time, which I think was near Castle Rock, and it's kind of fallen apart, so you don't get the same huge waves anymore. The harbor has frozen on a few occasions in the past. I think as recently as 2004, the harbor froze. This may have been 1898, 1907, or 1912. The harbor froze over all those times. I don't know if I'd still be brave enough to go out there like that and stand there. This is a scene, the causeway after a big storm. Just to orient you, Riverhead Beach is over here on the right, with this big warehouse going right down to the shore. So it was pretty well torn up after that storm. Something Marbleheaders would deal with on a regular occasion. This is apparently some kind of outing. It was captioned Misery Island, June 17th, 1893. Lapham, Goodwin, FBL, Blake, and Henry Goodwin. And they seem to be having a gay old time. Some bathing costumes, Cora on the left, including the shower cap like topper. Fred recorded scenes of boat building and boat moving, which must have been quite a process. This sign on the house says Glover Street, which is where Glover Square is now, going down to, the boat itself is on Front Street. Kind of taken from the corner of the landing building. And watching a lobsterman at work, I would guess this is Little Harbor. Another one of the same. And then he took a few at, I would guess, Gulfway Beach because of all the rocks. A couple, she's sticking her tongue out at the photographer, and a family enjoying the sun. Lauren mentioned those then and now photos, so I thought I'd include some of those. I think the really interesting thing about these is that things have changed so little, but things have also changed so much. In this picture, which was one of our Instagram photos, this is a mailman of some kind with a lot of newspapers or parcels that he's carrying. You can see Abbott Hall in the background here. And then a view, the same view today is the corner of Chestnut Street. You can see Abbott Hall in the distance. And this building, which here is blue, however, it has recently been painted in really intense red.
Yeah.
This picture I took before, obviously before the paint job. I think it's this building right here. I checked
Oh.
Zillow, and according to Zillow, this building was built in 1900. So it is possible that that is that
Oh, yeah.
building there. There are no windows on the side, which is the same here as well. We're back on State Street at Fred's second floor office, and here assistants are sticking their heads out the windows to pose for a photo being taken by someone, probably Fred,
No, they're not
sticking his head out
laptops.
another window. These wooden frames, one of the final steps in exposing an albumin print was to put the film out in the sun and let the sun do most of the work. And another picture, but this boy is on the first floor. So you can see the walkway running along the side of the building. I don't know if there was a stairway running along there or if he was in the laundry or exactly how the space inside was laid out. But you can see that house across the street with the distinctive roof line. That's 16 State Street. And this is the view now as you're coming out of Crosby's parking lot.
Yeah.
Along the side of the building there, it's all greenery, but that same building is there, now red, square windows. This group, which includes Cora, second from left, are standing in the middle of Orange Street, just below Old Burial Hill in the background. This huge boulder on the right here is a real identifying feature. That's the view now.
Yeah.
Much more filled in with houses and trees, but the boulder is still there. And this is on Darling Street. This pump was on Darling Street. The house behind was a store. There are signs on it that read small and large peanuts and fresh milk. And that's the location now. Remarkably similar. And then the last one is this boy back on State Street. He's walking down State toward the harbor. He's right alongside number 32 State Street, which is on the corner of Glover Square coming out behind him.
Where Tim lived. That's
So
it.
just imagine him on the sidewalk there. It's interesting that even the light post is in the same spot. See where the light post is in today's scene, and I don't know if that's a telephone pole or what, but it's in the exact same spot 100 and some odd years later. Okay, my final category is children. Fred and Cora never had any children, but it's clear from the photographs that Fred took that they very much enjoyed children, that they loved spending time with them, their nieces and nephews, and the children of friends. These two little boys apparently are eating bread, maybe, I'm not sure what they have. But this is a good example of that street photographer kind of pausing kids, and they seemed happy to pose for a picture. The kids waiting at the shore. This is again on State Street, right in front of number 15, the distinctive house behind them. This is an older Fred here with friends, maybe relatives, nephews, nieces. And this little girl who is standing on that walkway along the side of the State Street building is ID'd as Marion Snow. I found a Marion Snow who was born in 1891. So that would make her about 5 years old in 1896. The snow shovelers. This was also an Instagram picture that we included. Maybe the same big storm in February of 1898 that Fred took lots of pictures of. This is on Washington Street, across the street from the muffin shop where they're standing. Mucking about in tide pools was as popular then as it is now, and these little boys are definitely dressed for it. Sitting on a barrel. The boy on the left, yes, knew about this, is identified as Hooper Reynolds Goodwin. And I think he might have been some relation to Fred. I don't have a name for the other little boy. This picture just radiates joy, except for maybe that one child who looks bored to pieces. But the little girl with glasses is wonderful. And Cora with another friend on the rocks.
Boy, they look a little precarious there.
This child in an incredibly ornate bonnet. And a picture of an older Fred and Cora with that child with the bonnet and some other children and a friend. It looks like Fred encountered a group of kids cooling off in the water at Riverhead Beach. And in this picture, at first here, they're very serious and kind of hesitant, like, what is this guy doing? But they quickly warm up and start acting silly. And I can never resist kind of zooming in on these kids. These two pictures introduced another question to me about the era. Even though they're in the water, these children seem to be a different class than the kids we usually see in most of his photos. These children are thin, they're very roughly dressed, quite different from the beautifully dressed and bonneted children we've seen in pictures from Fred's more family circle. So it would be something to explore. These children are really, to some extent, in rags, but no less delighted to pose for his camera. These two I love. I love the hat for bathing. So one more child-related photo, and here an older Coralie on the far left with friends, with a child and friends. She died after a brief illness at Mary Alley Hospital on 11/13/1933, which was the day after her 31st wedding anniversary. She was only 57 when she died. And this is an older Fred. You can finally tell he's starting to look a little older, at work in his office with files of jobs on the wall behind him. This is his obituary that appeared in the Boston Herald the following day. He died at Salem Hospital in April of 1945. He was 76. What I find notable about this obituary is that other than a single line mention of his employment with the railroad, it makes absolutely no mention of his life and work as a photographer. It's certainly what he is best remembered for today, not for being an assessor or for being an auditor, but for being a photographer and that legacy that he's left behind. Both Fred and Cora and their extended family are buried at Waterside Cemetery. And you can walk around and see Fred and Cora's graves, and Charlie and Mary and the rest of the family. I thought this was a good picture to end on because it's a good illustration of the exuberance with which Fred Litchman took photographs and recorded Marblehead history. Thank you. There you go. And then in addition to the Marblehead Museum website and Instagram, I have an Instagram account just because I love this stuff and I post things as well. So if you want to have a look, I'm at Marblehead 1629.
Yeah. About this children.
we know there were a couple of warehouses.
Yes,
Is there evidence that children were living there? It looks like they don't have parents. And off to the left, there seems to be some kind of, is that a child? I didn't know if it was more, no, that's. more like
she is a little more detached, but
I thought
she's
maybe it
not
was
much
like an
older.
older girl, young woman who was maybe chaperoning them.
Yeah,
Do we know, was there any evidence of an orphanage?
I haven't seen any, and I have seen many references to adults in the almshouse or, but never, that's an interesting question. Because I'm sure there were orphans and, you know, particularly in earlier years with sailing disasters and things like that,
It sort of looks like they're being taken out for a fun.
for an outing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What about, what is it, children's, where the YMCA campus, wasn't that a children's
Children's
hospital?
Island.
So that's not near there, right?
no, it's on, out the harbor a ways, and that was also for ill children, I think.
Yeah.
The sanitarium set up, yeah, I don't know, this is just one picture that I think you could really, could be the start of a investigation into that. Because Fred's circle was very prosperous, and
And I've seen photos of the different school classes. You know,
yes,
through the years, and none of them.
I know, it's curious.
What about the Maddie's building?
Yeah,
Do you think that was, so would that have been the same? Obviously, it changed to become what Maddie's is now with the windows and all that stuff, but it's the same structure?
yes.
It
yes.
is, right? It's just
Yeah.
amazing to me.
And that facade that goes above the roof line, exactly the same. I see that with a lot of architecture, the windows change. You know, you'll find an old picture of a house and the door will be in the middle. And then you'll look at that house today and the door will be on the far left or the far right. And I think it's just because at one time maybe it was being used as a store. So you walked into the middle and then somebody said, no, I'm gonna use this for a residence. So I'm gonna come in the side and make that, you know, but the basic foundation.
So was the stairway on the left side in that photo you showed? I can't remember. That goes up to the top sides there. Was that there?
No, that was not there. That was not there. That's changed.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can get back to that one. too quick.
Obviously, there was that stair in the back. and
There would have been,
There was a building behind it.
yes, there was a
but that's
building
no longer-
behind it.
where
That's
the
no
parking
longer
is.
there. Yeah, yeah. It's a real puzzle sometimes to figure out what building is this and what's changed and what used to be there. Yeah.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Hope to see you next week. Dan Dixie next week. Yeah, next Thursday, either on Zoom or in person. So thank you all for joining us. Have a great night.
Thank you.